levelling up, on repairing our social fabric, and this evening we're talking about a topic which actually is right at the heart of the work that we do. So we've been doing a project for the last 6 or so months. It's all about levelling up in practice. We've got this sort of government white paper, 300 or so pages. I'm sure you've read every single one. And what we were trying to work out in different areas is what levelling up actually means. When you talk to members of the public, when you talk to local business leaders, civic leaders, what does it mean? One of the things we did was focus groups and talk to members of the public, and would ask very open questions like, tell us about Oldham, how are things going? The very first thing a lot of people talked to us about was Oldham FC. And they said, well look, let me tell you about this as a symbol of how things are going in this area. And they would talk about their memories of going to games, of that being something which made them and their area unique, gave them an identity, gave them a sense of coming together across differences in many different ways to build relationships. And then they very quickly talked about the decline of that club, that they felt that the fact that speculative foreign ownership, that what they saw as poor management had led to the decline of that team, and that mirrored the decline of their area. And so we started thinking about and doing some work as a think tank on what's the role of sport, both in local identity and how people think about their area and themselves, but also the really important role it can play in the community. And we've seen places like South Shields, amazing clubs that do work via community trusts. And so this evening we're talking about a couple of things. One, the potential of football, the potential of sport to generate pride in place, to be a down payment, a foundation for levelling up. And we're talking about what needs to be done to secure that foundation, and we're going to be talking about some of the work in the fan-led review of football governance that really set out some really practical recommendations on what the sense is at the moment of where they are. So I will very quickly introduce my panel and then I'll hand over to them. You will note we are not in the venue we previously said we would be in. There are some parliamentary votes at the moment, so it may well be that Tracy and Sarah need to dash off at a certain moment to vote. You'll know that's going on because there'll be a very loud bell. They will run. You should not run. You can stay where you are. And then they'll come back after that vote has happened. So let me introduce my panel. I'm delighted just immediately on my right to be joined by Tracy Crouch MP. Tracy led the fan-led review of football governance that published 6 or so months ago now.
Nearly a year.
Nearly a year ago. Well, very little has happened politically since, so that's good. Tracy was previously Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Sport and Civil Society from June 2017 to 2018. And you've got to go now.
Yep.
Okay. So what I'll do is introduce them, and then we'll hear from them after, and they'll agree, I imagine, with everything we've heard from the rest of the panel. So Tracy will speak in a moment, previous sports minister, and Sarah will introduce when she pops back. Our other speakers, so we're delighted to be joined by Steve Kavanagh, the Chief Executive of Millwall Football Club. Millwall does fantastic work in the community. Steve also a trustee of the Millwall Community Trust, and has previously had a career working at clubs like Southend United and elsewhere, so very well experienced to talk about some of the work Millwall are doing. I hope you can hear me over the bell. I'm just going to project as loud as I possibly can, because it's not okay. So thank you, Steve, for joining us. To my left, we've got Tom Greatrix, Vice Chair of the Football Supporters Association. Tom was previously an MP and advisor to Nick Brown prior to that, and then moved to Scotland in 2004 to take on a role at East Dunbartonshire Council. He was Director of Corporate Affairs at the National Health Service 2014-2006. That's you, Martin. And then finishing the panel on my far right, we have Rick Parry, Chairman of the English Football League. Rick has previously been CEO of the Premier League, former CEO of the Football Club. During his 12 years there, the club won 10 trophies, including UEFA Champions League. So we've got a fantastic group of professionals here from the footballing world to talk about the potential for football to generate pride in place. And we'll be joined by our 2 MPs just after to grill them on what they're doing from their positions to secure the fan-led review. Bell will stop in a moment, I promise. Steve, I'm going to start with you unfairly, if that's all right. I want you to talk a little bit about the role that Millwall play in your area and why football can be a tool to support regeneration, to support levelling up, to support the resilience of communities. So, over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Adam. I don't have your booming voice, but I will do my best. Good evening, everyone. As Adam said, I'm Chief Executive of Millwall Football Club and a trustee of Millwall's Community Trust. My sins, I'm a Chartered Accountant with over 20 years of experience in football as Finance Director and holding Chief Executive positions across all 4 divisions for 3 clubs. Charlton Athletic, we have a fantastic history and record in the community, Southend United, and of course Millwall now. Those 3 clubs may be different clubs, but they have similar community commitments, providing a sense of real pride for fans and their communities. I'm also a fierce advocate of improving sustainability within football. It's a passion, as you would hope, and the council would have. In terms of the fan-led review and my overriding opinion of it, this is a fantastic piece of work, obviously led by Tracy and many others, addressing so many key issues. It's important to recognise that clubs are community assets and they're part of the family. They need protecting, as demonstrated by the real events of Bury and Derby, plus other very near misses. It's our collective responsibility to ensure no more communities suffer through other near misses and unsustainable behaviour. I've been asked the question, what does Millwall mean to its community and what does the community mean to the club? Well, I'm proud to represent a club whose trust does such amazing work. We have a real sense of pride running through everything we do. The trust and the club work together day in, day out, delivering for our communities, working with people of all ages and very diverse backgrounds. Such work is often not really understood or properly communicated. We just get on and do it. What do we do? I don't really have enough time to explain in any real detail, but I'll try and give you a quick snapshot. Firstly, we adapt to our community needs, showing the ability to act quickly to support local people, working with and delivering local community plans. Such adaptability was best demonstrated during the pandemic, where Millwall ran initiatives such as Hospital Heroes for NHS workers, providing financial advice sessions with Barclays, yoga sessions, bedtime stories read by the players for children of NHS staff, and much more, including storing PPE, and in truth, anything that was thrown at us. More generally, we support food banks, with fans bringing food to matches for drop-off zones around the ground. We run a coffee morning every Wednesday at the stadium for the community to engage, provide somewhere for people to meet and meet with each other. That may become more important as the cost of living and heating becomes an issue in the winter. We run free community football sessions every Sunday, bringing together community and fans. We run mental health and healthy eating initiatives, provide education and training programs for young people, provide CV writing courses for the unemployed. We provide prison programs to rehabilitate offenders and give them coaching qualifications. We work with Divert to keep young people out of prisons for member of staff working out of Lewisham Prison. We run walking football sessions for seniors to address loneliness, provide over 5,000 meals for children who would otherwise go hungry during school holidays. I could go on, but I hope you get the idea. We do a lot. We take great pride in genuinely changing lives in our community, and our community take great pride in us. And the key point is it's our community. You don't have to be a Millwall fan to benefit. We do this to provide pride in place for all. When I joined Millwall nearly 6 years ago, I quickly realised that joined the family. The fans are bound by an invisible bond, as families are. Families can be dysfunctional at times. Millwall fans have always spoken their minds, as families do. The families have pride and togetherness. We do care. We're rightly very proud of everything we do, so are our fans and the communities we engage with. As a chartered accountant with over 20 years of experience in football across all 4 divisions, I like to think I'm well placed to understand the finances of the game. The model was broken. EFL clubs aren't sustainable for a variety of factors, mainly driven from above, and factors imposed on us such as parachutes, or trampolines as I like to call them. This needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency to avoid the next Bury or Derby. Enhanced sustainability in football will also allow all clubs to build on the crucial work in their communities, provide enhanced capability and security to address issues we can all see coming. We cannot risk the future of our clubs or such community assets because of unsustainable economics in the game. At Millwall, we have a fantastic owner of nearly 20 years. Every month there was financial jeopardy when I asked him for nearly £1 million to run the club. This misconception that the Championship is financially okay is a long way from reality. It's the worst of all places, truth be known. My owner and I believe that risking the future of communities in this way cannot be right. Redistribution will help the whole pyramid, and therefore their communities allow pride in place to grow and flourish. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We cannot miss it. To do so puts our clubs and the communities working at risk. We have to ensure pride does not come before a fall. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. We'll definitely get to some of those issues about the financial model or what needs to happen in just a moment. Tom, let me turn from you from a kind of fan's perspective or a football supporter's perspective. Why is it really important that football is protected and supported as part of attempts at regeneration?
Well, I think a lot of what Steve's illustrated demonstrates exactly why, from a supporter's perspective, these issues are so important. Because what Steve was talking about in terms of the work that Millwall does in the community, and a great, Millwall's always been for a long, long time a great community club. It's always had in modern times a very strong identity with this community, and there are other examples around the country as well. But what that also does is it means the pride and the identity that people have with their club is more than just about Saturday afternoon or the Tuesday evening fixtures. It's much more than that. And I mean, in the BBC there was stopped doing it now. But when you used to hear the classified football results on a Saturday evening at the start of the sports report, lots of those places you only ever heard of because you heard the name of the football team. And then, if you're like me, the sport team has gone up and down through the leagues, you've probably been to most of them. And when you go to those places, a lot of those places you only ever heard of, whether that's Bury or Oldham, whatever, you see and you feel and you experience, there might only be 4,000 or 5,000 for a third tier, fourth tier game in the ground. But actually how that club does, and how that club is doing, and how it's exactly what you said about Oldham, you could write that again and again over a number of different places. And it's one of the things that people identify with their place. And I think you said you don't have to be a fan, but by the same token, people attach and get an identity with the club. They might not necessarily go and watch them every week, but they'll know about how their club's doing and how well it's doing and when it gets into trouble. And I think the thing that brought that home to me most of all was with the situation that happened at Bury in that August, when sadly, effectively Bury had to cease being part of the Football League, and you had people standing outside the ground and coming to the ground almost with a sense of loss, bereft about what had happened, including people who haven't necessarily been going every day, but they still felt that was part of their town, part of their community, part of their identity, which was lost. And come back to why was it lost? Ultimately, people attached a lot of blame, and Rick's predecessors got a lot of blame about various aspects to it, but fundamentally, it comes back to the point that Steve was making. Why did it get into that position? It got into that position because the framework of the financial regulation and oversight of football wasn't there to an extent that would protect clubs. And that's what I think the whole of the fan-led review is fundamentally about. It's about how you protect those assets that are so important in communities, so important to so many people, so important to people's identities, in a way that's sustainable for the long term, and doing that in a way that enables what we as match-going fans are there for, which is to see how well you do on the pitch and going up and down and between divisions, and all part of the identity that makes English football such a world-renowned asset that I think we definitely do need to ensure that we protect. And I'm sorry to say this, but in a previous life I was a member of Parliament, and during that time we had debates about football being in the last chance saloon. We talked about if football doesn't change itself, we'll change it. That was nearly 10 years ago. And we have now got, for the first time, I think, with the fan-led review, which is a fantastic piece of work, fan-led on the basis of the issues that were addressed were those that are important to fans, but it wasn't written by people who are just fans. It was actually took a huge amount of evidence from clubs from across people who are involved in regulation, people who are supporters, obviously, but across a whole range of issues, and has come up, as I think, what is the most comprehensive blueprint for how we can positively protect clubs for the future. And it's sitting there, waiting to be implemented, and it's a massive opportunity for the current politicians to do something which I think will be will have a huge value for generations to come. And if they don't, the next lot will.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So we'll again come back to some of those issues around finance and make sure Tracy knows she's got lots of compliments so far on the fan review when she goes back. Rick, let's turn to you. So why, the EFL clearly huge interest in this, huge amount of work on this. Why is football so important to Pride in Place, and what needs to be done to protect that role?
If only the BBC still read out the football results, but there we go. we believe we're offering a massive levelling up opportunity, one that isn't actually going to cost the government a penny, which makes it very attractive. Our purpose is making clubs sustainable, at every level. This isn't the EFL putting its hand in the Premier League pocket. This is about looking at the 100+ clubs who will pass through the EFL, either downwards or upwards, because we're not just looking up at the Premier League, we've also got to recognise our responsibilities and look down at the National League. But if we're to have better quality owners, if we're to have investment, if we're to have growth, and there's no reason why we can't have growth within the EFL, we need clubs to be sustainable. That has to be the starting point. What does that mean? It basically means not dependent on owner funding. Which is not to say that owners cannot invest and cannot have ambition, but it's the dependence on owner funding that's the killer. And to make clubs sustainable, we need two things. We need redistribution of revenues to make them solvent, and then we need better regulation to make sure they're not profligate and they don't waste the money. And we've been trying for 2.5 years to have a dialogue on redistribution. Started with the Select Committee in 2020, went through Project Big Picture, which was killed before it was allowed to go off the ground, and still had many, many positive elements from our point of view. Then we had the Premier League Strategic Review. We eagerly wait our invitation to join that. But essentially we got nowhere. And why we got nowhere? Well, we don't have any negotiating strength. What have we got to trade? All we can do is to plead. So it's been hard and it's taken a long time. But fundamentally, then we have to ask, does the pyramid matter? Well, of course it matters to us, it matters immensely to us, but we would say it also matters to the Premier League, or it ought to. Brentford became the 50th club to join the Premier League. 6 clubs have been in it forever, which means 44 haven't, which means 3 clubs for every one of the 14 places. So movement of clubs up and down the pyramid, we say, is absolutely vital to the Premier League as well as to us. Premier League mistakenly says that competitive balance means any team can beat any other. That's actually been proven to be wrong. Research said that's just nonsense. What competitive balance means is uncertainty of outcome at the end of the season. So relegation battles matter, but primarily viewers want to watch big teams win and then they want uncertainty at the bottom. So we think variety, as Steve said, we've stopped using the word parachute payments, it's now trampoline payments. Have Norwich bouncing up and down and Fulham every year is not variety, we believe is not healthy. Why is there a problem? Well, I think football sleepwalked into a problem, a bigger problem over 30 years. All the numbers have been there in public sight, the trends have been there. When we formed the Premier League in 1993, first year of the Premier League, the turnover of the FA Premier League Limited was 45 million. The turnover of the EFL was 34 million. Same order of magnitude, very, very close. Interestingly, 9 million of the EFL's turnover was from the pools. Who remembers the pools? But over the course of just under 30 years, Premier League's turnover has increased 68 times. EFL's turnover has increased 5.5 times. The gap has diverged at that rate. And if you look at 2001-2, look at the collective income of the 20 Premier League clubs, 666 million more than the 72 EFL clubs. A huge gap. But by 2018-19, less than 20 years, 4.1 billion. Getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And sharpest focus is to look at the bottom of the Premier League. And 2018-19, because COVID years since distort things a bit, but in terms of the distributions, Huddersfield Town got £96 million from the Premier League. Norwich, the 21st club in the pyramid, got 8 million, a gap of 88 million. That's unbridgeable. And in fact, brilliant for Huddersfield to have 2 years in the Premier League, but everybody would celebrate that because that was out of the blue, and it was a bit of a surprise, and great that it happened. But it would take them 35 years in the Championship to earn the money they got in 2 years in the Premier League. That is the problem. That is completely unbridgeable. Does the Premier League accept there's a problem? Absolutely it does. It's just the solution that's completely flawed, because the Premier League solution is parachute payments, which it gives to its relegated clubs to enable them to get straight back up, which they are doing Solidarity to the non-parachute clubs is defined as 11% of the birthday parachute payment. So they're actually defining that every other club is only going to get 10% of the money. Premier League has stated that over 3 years, including last season, they've given 887 million to championship clubs, which is true. 600. One is parachute clubs are 3 times as likely to get promoted. Look, we can see that. You just have to look at the league table. That's been proven through academic research. More seriously, irrational behaviour on the part of owners. Steve's touched on it a little bit. So in the championship now, losses are operating losses 400 million. Wages are 120% of turnover. Debt is now 1.7 billion. Owner funding in the championship, in aggregate 380 million. That's 16 million per club every season, which makes it the most expensive lottery ticket on the planet. Steve touched on it. Owner of Preston, weekend before last, put out a statement to fans saying, okay, we haven't got the biggest squad, we know we're in the lower half of the table, very well run club, model of a club that we want to be sustainable, a community club with a great little stadium and a terrific history. But the owner said it cost us 24 million just to keep Preston going at the bottom half of the championship. And of that 24 million, the Hemmings family have to put 12 million in every year. How do you sell Preston? How do you bring in new owners to Preston? How do you make Preston a model of fan ownership that the starting point is 12 million? So there has to be change. And we have a model for change which has been misdescribed as us insisting on getting 25% of the money. But our model is basically to halve the gap between the bottom of the Premier League and the top of the Championship. So instead of being 88 million, it's down to 44 million. We abolish parachute payments. We make the Championship competitive. Chances of getting this voted through the Premier League are approximately nil, because we're asking their clubs, first of all, to take less money while they're in the Championship, and then in the Premier League, in the unfortunate event they get relegated, they get the parachute. So that's not going to work. So it needs independent intervention. Regulation we're very keen on. We started our dialogue with Tracy, which you will remember by saying we think we can do it ourselves. It took us about 5 minutes to realise we weren't convinced with that. So we kind of pivoted and said, okay, well, if you have a regulator, we can make your job a little bit easier because we can demonstrate that 2/3 of our clubs are insolvent. So if you want to put them out of business, or we want to refuse to give them a licence, then do so. But we think a better approach, again, making clubs sustainable, regulation and redistribution have to go hand in hand. The two are absolutely inseparable. We do passionately believe in better regulation, to the point where we're fine with it being independent statutory regulator. We have no fear of that at all. As I said, we do believe we can do it ourselves, but we're not going to win that argument, so we kind of move on. But again, it's all about making all of those clubs sustainable, better model for English football. It's not going to harm the Premier League. The Premier League will continue to thrive. It's miles ahead of everybody in Europe. We look at the last transfer window. Premier League net spend on transfers was 1.4 billion. The total, the aggregate spend of the next 4 major leagues in Europe was 140 million euros. They are so far ahead of Europe that it's, again, another unbridgeable gap. But the idea we're trying to harm the Premier League, we're absolutely not. We want the Premier League to succeed. We want our biggest clubs thriving in Europe. But then we do want the thriving pyramid underneath, because that's about community, that's about leveling up. That's all about pride and trust.
Thank you very much, Rick. So, Tracy will turn to you. We've heard from Steve some of the fantastic work that's been done in Millwall, from Tom about the relationships both fans have with their place, but also the connection that football creates between places in terms of visiting fans. What's been common about all 3 contributions is 2 things. One, the broken financial model and that underpinning a lot of the challenges, but also this is not a new conversation, that actually this challenge has been around for a while, and there's been a lack of kind of grip or action by successive governments of all parties to deal with it. So I guess if you could hear first why you think this is such an important part of the Levelling Up agenda, and what hopes you have for action this time.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome on World Menopause Day to the hottest room in Parliament. And just say that I think there's just for a second to park football as a sport, and let's think about it from a community perspective. Everybody in this room, I suspect, probably take the offside rule. Many people might be able to tell you that Millwall are 5 points off the top of the championship. Luton Town, where Rachel represents, 4 points. People would have internally tutted you, because I did when you called it Onward Football Club. Just a big part there. But, let's just sort of park the stat-turn aspect of football for a second, because it is really important to recognise that actually this isn't about the sport of football, this is about what football contributes to its community. And the reason why I'm so proud to share the fan review into football is that actually it's about having that deep understanding of what happens in a community when there is no football club there anymore, and what it takes away. We started with the idea of having a fan-led review because of Berry, and it's almost as if Berry itself has become an adjective in terms of how we discuss football in the community, and that's really sad. We heard some heartbreaking evidence from Berry fans, but also other fans, where clubs have been in really wobbly situations as to what that meant to them. Why it was important that we had to do something to stop another Berry from happening. There is always a Berry, an Oldham, Derby, some thereabouts, and actually some of the Premier League football clubs who have in the past been teetering on the edge of significant financial challenge. And so them disappearing is enormous. So I never buy into this, attack that we quite often get in the media on people who become responsible for sports policy at government level if they're not known to be football fanatics, because it's not about having an understanding of football or sport, it's having an understanding of why it is important to people and to those communities. And that's why I think this is a really good topic to be having a discussion about. And why I was pleased that when Michael Gove was having discussions with me and many other people about what should be in the Leveling Up white paper, there was a reference to sport, and in particular to football. I am of the view, many people know this, but I'm of the view that sport is the answer to any problem. Right? Show me a problem in the world that sport doesn't answer. And then, because it is such a fundamental thing, to be able to help people, to support them physically, mentally, to help grow communities. It's a glue that binds people together. And that's why we started the fan-led review into football, to make sure that we don't see another Berry. And I thought we were, to be honest, going to see another Berry with Derby, likewise with Oldham. And actually, we're lucky. And this, I would say, is more about luck. And so when we looked at football, we spoke to the fans as a starting point, and then we built recommendations and parts of the review around those initial conversations. We spoke to all stakeholders, including the EFL, we spoke to individual clubs, we spoke to the Premier League, the Football Association, because actually we need to get this right. And when we put the review together, when we put the report together, we designed it in a way, I like to call it like we would put together a good album. Right? There was a reason for the flow in the fan-led review report. We started with regulation because we really thought that actually having good regulation enables clubs to actually have that security. There is that security blanket in place, good corporate governance, fan involvement and engagement. All these things were a very important starting point to the football review. Once all those things were discussed, and in my view, once all those things were in place, then we get to the point about financial distribution. Because actually, Rick is right, the Premier League is exceptionally wealthy, and we should be enormously proud of that. I'm incredibly proud that I've been sports minister in a country which has such a healthy football competition, where players want to come and play, where we should be trying to make sure that we attract the best players in the world. We should be trying to continue to generate wealth within the Premier League. And then we should be making sure that we that some of that wealth trickles down, but it needs to be done so in a way that is regulated. It's not. I'm not of the view that Premier League wealth should be going down to clubs which are badly run, or that they haven't got the right regulations in place and so on. So that's why we sort of kind of came up with the report, the recommendations that we do. I don't want to see another community like Berwick absolutely decimated. I think if it hasn't been aired already, the last few episodes of Peter Crouch film around his trip to Berwick, I think are really worth watching. They're really, he spoke to me about it, and heartbreaking testimony as to sort of kind of what impact it has. It wasn't just about the football club, it's about the town, it's about people who once upon a time contributed to that. So, I think you can see the bad that has happened. So what we need to do is make sure we prevent that from happening again. That's why I very strongly believe that the recommendations within the fan-led review are the right ones to go forward to make sure we don't see another Berwick. Now, how can we make sure we continue to support communities beyond that? We don't just want. I don't want to just see a picture of status quo. I want to see football clubs that are used in a more diverse way, that really support their communities. We saw it during COVID, by the way. A lot of our COVID vaccination centres were housed in football clubs because they're in the heart of those community. We've seen a little bit of that continue. Many clubs, throughout the pyramid and into non-league as well, using their grounds as a means of connecting people within their communities, particularly groups that are focused around men's health, which I think is really important. We see it from a loneliness perspective, from a dementia perspective. Clubs are engaging in a whole host of different issues, and you want to see more of that. You want to see local NHS have a housing, have a house there. You want to see your borough council or whoever be able to have that as a focal point. So it's about making sure that you continue to support football clubs within that community. And so I don't really want to talk about some kind of the intricate details of the fan-led review. I would say that I think recommendations are there to ensure that we do continue to have really healthy football clubs that enable them to support their community, and in return their community will support them.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I'll follow up a couple of questions in just a minute, but sorry, let me bring you in. So, as MP, Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party now for youth, what's your sense of why this issue really resonates, and what do you think the prospects are for seeing some action on it from the government?
So I've had football in my life, for all my life, with my brothers in the corner of East Lancashire, Blackburn Rovers, and I also have in my constituency, Accrington Stanley, a great community club, and we've got Burnley. All three are now in the EFL. I'm quite glad that one of them is now in the EFL. But all of these clubs will benefit from the fan-led review in one way or another. But when we talk about pride and place, I just look at my own club, Accrington Stanley, and they do amazing things in my community. The shirt giveaway that they've just done, which is for all years young pupils, to really entice them to the ground, but then get their families there as well, so it works both ways. They've been hosting Ukrainian refugees. Only last weekend I was there, where they let the ground be used to host an event for Battles awareness. So all of those things make a huge difference in my community. A very small club, but one of the benefits that people don't see about local clubs is actually the benefit it gives back to local businesses as well, and the footfall that it creates in your town centres. So when we talk about levelling up and the £20 million that's coming into Accrington Town Centre, what we don't realise is actually the football club links directly into that, because they are bringing the people in to look at the new projects that were created in areas like mine. So for me, the fan-led review is not about, so we look at the pyramid, it's not about making sure that Accrington Stanley benefits more than others and can move up and down the league. It's actually making sure that that club still exists. At the end of the day, in the local community, I would hate to see anything happen. But also, I think we need to go on to the topic of a good owner. I'm very lucky, and Rick will know Andy Holt very well. He's very local, but he's a great owner. And we're lucky in Accrington to have that, but not all clubs. have that benefit of a good owner. So I think the key part for me in the fan-led review are the tests on owners and directors to make sure that we've got the people there who care about the community, care about the club. And so as a wider part of the levelling up agenda, I think to be talking about the local community clubs, especially the Red Bull seats, where we have a lot of EFL clubs, the pressure is on there from us to the government to make sure that this is implemented and make sure that, God forbid, nothing happens like it did at Berwick. So I think it's key for us, it's key for me, and there's a lot of MPs pushing it now with the new government, and we'll keep doing that because we understand what our local community clubs need, not just to us but also to the fans and to the wider community as a whole, and the help that they provide in really truly levelling up places like that.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to abuse the position of the chair, ask a couple of questions. We appear to be standing room only, which is fantastic. And there are some seats over there, so if you do want to kind of awkwardly shuffle to that side, I'll give you cover now by asking the questions you're going to do so. Rick, I want to come to you. So you alluded to the fact that it's, one of the things from the fan-led review was that there was the possibility of a voluntary arrangement to be reached by the Premier League and the EFL, and that there was a second resort was a backup, the state, the government might step in. So I wanted in this kind of round of questions to focus on now where we are, what needs to be done by fans, by MPs, by others to try and get progress. How are those conversations going with the Premier League, and do you think it is going to be necessary for government to step in?
Well, we hope they're going to start any day. But they haven't, just for the record, started yet. Premier League says it's close, but been close for a long time. I said football's had 30 years to address this, and the likelihood of it happening without independent intervention, it's not going to happen voluntarily. It just isn't. Just isn't. It could have done. So the numbers have been there. Deloitte have produced them year on year. They're there for everybody to see. Gaps been widening, and yet nothing's been done.
So let me ask you then, Tracy. So government has got quite a long to-do list right now, kind of an unenviable position in terms of the number of challenges it's trying to address. Do you think it is likely that implementing the fan-led review is going to be something that's prioritised by ministers?
I don't know the answer to that. We're all pushing. We are coming up for the year anniversary of the publication of the report. It feels like there hasn't been much public progress. I do know that DCMS officials have been working really hard on publishing the white paper. Obviously, it's slightly frustrating with the work that we went through for the report that there has to be a white paper, but there doesn't have to be a white paper. There is due process, but that still hasn't been published. I accept nothing but top quality in terms of the white paper. I think that the civil servants that are working on it, I know, are excellent. But it is being delayed, I think, by politics. And that is frustrating because I'm eager to get on with it. It will be a lengthy process. And the sooner we start, the sooner we can prevent other clubs from potentially going out of business. I worry about what kind of winter we're going to see and the impact that that's going to have on football clubs, particularly those that have more challenged finances. And so it would have been nice to have had some sort of safety net, at least started to replace.
Steve, let me come to you before I open up to some questions. One of the kind of arguments against the state intervening, or government intervening in football, is about a kind of nervousness that it's state overreach, not appropriate for the state to do. From a kind of club owner's perspective, how do you feel about that? Would you welcome a regulator, welcome more government intervention in this space?
I think Rick's answered that really in that ideally we can regulate ourselves, but the reality of where we are, and the reality of the gap that's arisen, means it's just not possible. And therefore, we have to turn to certain methods, and that seems to be the only solution. There is no other way, because where we are, the status quo, someone will go under, and sooner rather than later. And if we don't address this, then everyone's going to have blood in their hands. So we need to address it and deal with it, and we're powerless now. The only way we can do this is to turn for help. We're here to cry for help.
Can I just take issue with one thing about government intervention or government regulator? It's not, it's an independent regulator. No one thinks the insurance companies or the banks are regulated by government, right? And I think that's, sort of kind of falling slightly into the trap, dare I say, that this, government would be in charge of legislation that went through Parliament, would have to introduce legislation, but beyond that, it's very clear that it's not a government regulator, it's an independent regulator. This whole idea, someone sort of kind of call it malice, there's more important malice. I'm wearing that as a badge of honour, no one's going to be embarrassed before. But this is not some crazy kind of state intervention, it's about putting up something that enables football to have a safe, secure future. It's about making sure that, like the banks and insurance companies and other financial institutions and businesses, that aspects around capital and liquidity are looked at and regulated. And because remember, 2000 bank crisis, 2006, 2008, when all of a sudden we suddenly realised that none of the banks had anything when it went a bit pear-shaped. That's all we're saying, right?
Yeah.
It's not some crazy, malice intervention in football.
Football's Northern Rock moment kind of thing.
Also, just on that, what's proposed is a licensing regime. Licensing regimes exist in other places, other countries for football. It's not unusual to have a licensing regime. That is very, very different than a government running football. And exactly as Tracy says, there are some people who have jumped on that and make that to try and present it as something that it absolutely isn't. And no sensible government wants to be trying to run football.
Except when it does go wrong, everyone starts to shout, what's government doing? We've just had 2 rugby clubs go bust, and a number of people have said, well, why aren't government stepping in and saving them? And I say, well, they did with Berry. There's really reasonable questions, but you can't have it both ways. Okay? And so either you want sport to be run by government, I'd be very happy to be the dictator of all this sport. My mouse dictator, I'm happy to be the England team. But that's not how it works. And so you have to therefore create the environment through a system of independent regulation that does enable, does give sport that comfort.
And Tracy, can I just say, it's actually better than that, because you report virus and not.
Yeah, it does literally.
Yeah. Tom, the question to you, Tracy mentioned that the public profile of the fan-led review maybe hasn't been as high as it could be, and that might be, as we come to the year anniversary, a tool to kind of push government. I guess I wanted to ask, from a supporters' perspective, to what degree are supporters organised around this? To what degree can they be part of the movement to try and raise this up the political agenda?
Well, I think if you take a step back to when the impetus for the family review being in the manifesto, that was largely simply because of what happened with Berry, as Tracy said, and there was an outcry and a lot of feeling, not just from Berry fans, but from football fans across the piece that this has happened. And was able to happen. Why was it not seen happening before it did? And why was it not being able to be stopped? And then what precipitated it, the family review actually getting set up and started, was the Super League proposal. And you saw with that a huge, again, sort of view from supporters, not just of those clubs that were proposing to do it, be part of it, but across clubs and across supporter bases, because they wanted to make sure we protect the integrity of the pyramid that Rick spoke about, and the jeopardy and everything that's the sport that comes from that. I think, during the course of the evidence collecting that Tracy and her team did, there were hundreds of hours of evidence from supporters, from organised supporters groups on behalf of a wider group of supporters, and they put a lot of effort and time into that, precisely because of what happened in the past, what we promised in the past, and what hasn't been able to be delivered. In terms of what happens next and now, I think if we've had the review, it's been published, we've had the government initial response, we've been told there'll be a white paper coming in the sort of elastic term of this autumn.
Some.
Yeah.
It was some.
If that doesn't happen, I think what you will find is that more supporters groups will become more and more vocal about this, because they understand what it's about is protecting the situation their club might not be in now, but could be in at some point in the future, and that is fundamentally important and really integral to the way supporters view their clubs and wanting to ensure they're sustainable for the future.
Fantastic, thanks Tom. Okay, let's open up some questions from the floor. I'll take a kind of group of 2 or 3. I'll start with you, so just go hand them straight up, but then I'll take another couple too. So, a question from there, yeah.
Yeah, my name's Andrew. Thank you for presenting today. I just wonder, are we making an error in looking at this as only a national problem to solve? I know that's the remit, but given the amount of money and the pressure, I support Chelsea. But we were just bought for £4.25 billion by a big private equity house that it wants to make money. And the amount of financial firepower that comes in and the knock-on effects to salaries that they can pay their players, it just drives everything up and separates the Premier League even further from the rest of the pyramid. How do we go about fixing that without fixing the inputs? Because the Premier League competes against the other top domestic leagues, La Liga, Serie A, Bundesliga, and blows it out of the water financially already. And in an era of cheap money looking for a return, we should expect more Todd Bowleys to come in to football. So how can we fix this without it also, and did you consider that, and could you consider that as something in the future?
Excellent. So a question about the international financial angle on some of these problems. And any other questions so I can take them in a cluster? Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you could say the football team sport first, that seems to be the way.
Well, I support Sunderland, but I have worked in Huddersfield when they got unexpectedly promoted, and Preston North End, and I kind of good to see Steve on board today, because Steve and his football club Millwall really do get it, so to speak, with the community stuff that he does, and his comms department is excellent as well. Billy Taylor's one of the best in the business for that. I kind of want to it's more of a sort of comment, but also kind of tailor it towards a question. But basically, I actually took the time back in 2011 to submit as a fan, eagle-eyed kind of journalist, naive, to the DCMS and kind of put my views through, and then also the follow-up as well. And I was actually quoted in the follow-up, quoting the football authorities have merely given empty platitudes to the issues. So a decade on, I have to question what is actually different, because the most effective change comes, as I think has been alluded, from the hierarchy at the top, and in a social climate that has worsened since then. Much of the status quo has been discussed, still exists. Some of the stuff that I've been doing, for instance, last week alone, as part of the new initiative that I've set up, I received numerous calls and emails from clubs around their community projects, plans and initiatives that badly need investment and have been ignored for too long. Similarly, as a group of journalists and Wrexham fans, we all know obviously what's going on with Wrexham and the kick that's happened with the investment. We have published a self-sustainable magazine where the profits from that said magazine are being ploughed back into good causes, back into the local community and the football club. My point, which I think goes to how are you going to address the ideology and cultural issues that we have got, because it shouldn't be up to passionate individuals, groups, and when I say grassroots, I don't mean grassroots non-league, but self-starters, passionate people, and that to basically take on the baton of change and that, because at the moment a lot of the changes and a lot of the good positive stuff is coming from people self-funded and supporting their local communities.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think there are a range of questions in there, but the one I'm going to go for, that final one about how do we have kind of bottom-up innovation around the culture of football. How can we have different ways to improve financial viability or ways to raise profile? And I'll take one more question in this cluster, if there is one.
I'm Neil from Leighton Orient, and I support Leighton Orient. I've got a question about the whole concept of community cultural institutions, which football clubs obviously are, and around if we fall into a trap of being a bit complacent about that, and that only really flares up when there's bad ownership or it falls apart, and what steps perhaps local authorities can do, because they have more control over the clubs at a local level around safety and around stadium access and stuff like that. What you think, actually, rather than always reacting more progressively, what can partnerships look like on the ground? So it's always and forever, it's eternal, it's ongoing, rather than as we had at Leighton Orient in 2017, with some bad ownership and transitions we've had. the local authority speaking to us about what we could do, rather than having a conversation 5 years before, but actually how can we ensure these things never happen?
Excellent. So 3 questions there. One on the international funding, how do we address that, or do we need to address that? Secondly, on what innovation there might be around the culture of football from the bottom up, and a third one about whether we're a bit too complacent, what can local authorities do, what might we be able to do short of some of the interventions we've discussed. Rick, let me start to you with the international financial angle. You're kind of very well placed to comment on this. Is that something that we need to look at when considering the financial viability of domestic football and where the funding is coming from?
Well, I think we've got challenges, without doubt. I think there's, I think in a sense, the horse has long since bolted through the stable door, in as much as when we formed the Premier League, we never imagined that clubs would be in foreign ownership at all. We weren't quite then in the era of the local butcher, baker, candlestick maker, but most of the clubs were still owned by local entrepreneurs. Man United had just been listed, so we were starting to go towards quoted clubs. But the Leeds, the Chelseas, the Arsenals, the Aston Villas, very much still the local millionaire. Mm-hmm. Then we went into this rash of flotations. Then it was billionaires. Now you have to be a country to own a successful club. So, I mean, where next? And the idea that we have 16, 17 of our clubs in foreign ownership would have been unthinkable, but suddenly we woke up and it's happened. Nobody decided that it should happen. Nobody said, have we got the right rules in place? It was just, again, it was just ignored. It was just the marketplace and chasing dollars, chasing the dream, chasing owners. I mean, it's not just a problem within England, it's a problem across Europe. It's a problem UEFA has to grapple with because, you know, again, I was involved with UEFA for 3 years on financial fair play. And that is extremely challenging in terms of the nation states, the petrodollars, and how you actually have a system of regulation. As I said at the start, the challenge from League 2 up to the Champions League is you want ambition, you want clubs to be able to flourish and grow. So you don't want necessarily to say you can't have any owner funding. Mm-hmm. But owner funding is brilliant until it isn't. When suddenly the owner decides they can't fund it or they don't want to fund it. We look at Bolton, Eddie Davis sadly died, Jack Walker at Blackburn, Morris at Derby. When the tap is turned off, that's when you have the catastrophe. And again, you might have naively wondered, having been sort of caught once with the Abramovich problem, maybe it was an opportunity to reset with Chelsea, but instead of which we get another extraordinary price paid by somebody who clearly knows a lot more about the future than we do, because it's somebody who's expecting a return from a club that ordinarily is going to be losing 100 to 150 million a year. Economics are interesting. So yeah, the international aspect's a challenge as to what we do about it.
Well, Tracy, this is something you touched on in the review to a degree. Do you think this needs to be a big part of the white paper when it comes in? And how does it relate to this issue of pride in place? Because it's kind of a very different geographical level, but clearly a big problem.
So I think it's really important that we recognise the point that Rick made, which is that it's impossible to put GE back in the bottle when it comes to international ownership. But one of the things that we looked at in the report was around the owners and directors test and making sure that we have, you know, the right stringent sort of examination of owners. We also split the owners and the directors test. There's a very different skill to being an owner, and which is basically can you write a check, versus, you know, being a director, which is can you run a football club. And I think that's a really important distinction that we made. We also made a recommendation that you could review the test every 3 years, and that was really important because, you know, when I was sports minister, I cannot tell you the number of people who wrote to me about Owen Royston at Blackpool and saying, you know, why can't I sack him? And I was like, I can't. And actually, nor could anybody else, and, you know, because he passed the test, and that was fine. So it's about making sure that you actually do have those opportunities to actually just reassess the appropriateness of that person owning the football club. We use the phrase custodian quite a lot in the report, to kind of make it clear that actually owners are short-term custodians of their football club. And I mean, let's be clear, how many of us, if we won £180 million on the Euro Millions, who here wouldn't buy a football club, right? It's like
I would.
I would, of course I would, and but I think that you need to make sure that you have the right rules in place to keep checking the viability, to make sure that they recognise that they're custodians, to have good corporate governance in place that enables fans to ensure that they continue to protect the heritage of their club. And I think that we have seen that. We've got some really good examples of clubs who have a foreign owner who recognise that their fans are everything to that club, to the future of the club, and have already gone and changed things like articles of association to give fans the right of veto over certain changes to the heritage items and so on. So not all foreign owners are bad. Profit is also not a dirty word. But as long as we have everything in place that enables people to recognise the importance that power comes with, I think is why I still think that span review needs to be done in the whole and not as an a la carte menu. The whole thing, the review, is so designed on purpose. You can't just go cherry pick the bits that you like.
Sarah, let me come to you on this question about complacency that came from the front here. This idea that there are actions that could be taken by local authorities. You talked about your role as an MP in the local area. What can be done short of maybe Westminster taking action to address problems?
I sometimes think that local authorities don't recognise how much the club actually does for them, but actually takes off their workload as well. I mean, Hargreave Council, when I first walked on the report, there was issues with planning where they were trying to redevelop and build on the club. And the issues there, they just didn't seem to understand what we were trying to do for the community, whether that was for grassroots, football, anything like that. So I think there needs to be a closer relationship where local authorities and football clubs feel like they can just walk into the office as a local authority, sit down with them prior to the club collapsing, and be able to speak to them then. But I think for me, my role is to be able to facilitate that conversation with local authorities, which is what I've done with my club. But again, I do think that somebody in the local authority, it'll be different everywhere with the relationships that they've had, but right now things have changed in Accrington, where I think Family Hall would be able to walk into my council and speak to them and say, look, you're about to lose X, Y, and Z because we just can't continue anymore. So I think there's a role for members of Parliament in this to make sure that they're aware of the problems and before they happen, in a sense, and to be able to facilitate it really. I understand the issues, but I think unless somebody's banging on a local authority's door and actually telling them what's about to go wrong, then they're never going to understand the issues because, again, they're a separate entity to it. So I genuinely do think it's a case of, with a lot of things as well, have the conversation and go from there. And again, I think local authorities need to put some investment into local clubs as well and make sure if there's grant funding, they look at matching things like that, whether it's student youth clubs and things like that. I've got a brilliant community trust. They've got amazing things on for young people, and actually just some contributions from the local authorities when they realise that the club is taken away from what they should be providing.
Steve,
one of the things I'm going to interject, one of the most practical things local authorities can perhaps help with, which whenever you look at clubs that have had financial difficulty, there's a common theme across all of them, which is ownership of the stadium.
Yeah.
So planning around the stadium, protection of the stadium, as Steve will know all about
It's
it.
looking at me.
As community assets, absolutely vital. Yeah.
To the review. Steve, we have to hold you back from interviewing. So go on. What are some of the
It's a
challenges?
bit
you
of a
have?
long, boring story. I joined Millwall in October 2016. In September 2016, the local authority compulsory purchased all the land around the ground to sell to a local property developer who happened to to work for the council some years back, we won't go into that. And it's
Good
taken,
job this isn't on camera.
it's taken the best part of 5 years to unwind and to get to the position where I can walk into the mayor's office. We can have the conversation. We now are engaged in the conversation about how we actually work together to change the lease, to allow us to develop. They need housing to work together. We've stressed how much we deliver. It would cost the council £13 million a year more to replace what we provide for Lewisham and Southwark councils. That's a hell of a lot of money in services. They didn't get it. We've had a change of the guard of councillors, and they are now there. They're now realising the need to work with us. And as I kept saying to them, we do all this 13 million and we're at war. Imagine if we were friends, how powerful we can be. And now they've finally got it. And into that list, we will build in an SLA that means we have to commit to economic trust. We've got a planning application on Thursday for a training ground at Sevenoaks. Sevenoaks Council put it straight away, understood it without fear of the planning officers, but if they understand into that SLA and into the section 106 will be written in commitments to long-term future value of what we will do in that community, what we can deliver. We want to deliver it. We want to use the power of what we are to give social change. We have that. We have a unique opportunity and a blessing that we have a power, and we want to use it. And what we want back is actually someone to recognise that we need a little bit of help as well. Because if we go bust in the middle of that, then all help is unleashed. And you get to an owners. We had an American owner been there 17 years. He gets football and he gets Millwall versus Millwall t-shirt and he plays wherever he goes in the world because he loves the club and he's the epitome of a fantastic owner. He just happens to be American. He's brilliant. But God forbid I lose it because he has to put in so much money every year. We cannot risk losing those owners. They are repeated up and down the country. And to the point about local authorities is very well made. They need to understand how we do it. We need to sell the story more of what we deliver. But also we need help to ensure that we can keep the good owners, allow them to be entrepreneurs and to develop our business and grow them.
Tom, let me come to you on this kind of question we haven't addressed here from the audience that was about how we have a kind of culture of change within football and the example there of Wrexham and journalism, activism, funding some other activities. Are you seeing examples among fans, among supporters groups of innovative ways of increasing awareness of things like community ownership of assets, that sort of thing?
Yeah, look, supporters and organised supporters groups attached to clubs do a lot of things actually. They drive a lot of change and a lot of activity in those communities and associated with the clubs. They use what Steve's been talking about, the power of the institution of the club in positive ways. And in there are many examples where fans groups are part of that and sometimes are leading that, and then sometimes the clubs come in and join and are part of the same picture as well. So I wouldn't be so downbeat as I think the question was about that. I think there's plenty of examples of very positive action. And the point about local authorities, that's really about a relationship. It's always about a relationship. And the best local authorities and the best clubs get that. One of the things which I think goes through, like gone through the family review, is around being able to assess things in the sort of before things get to the point of crisis. And it's exactly the same with that. If you've got a good, strong relationship between a club and a local authority, you solve problems before they become big problems. You don't get to the sort of situation you have with Millwall, where you get to compulsory purchase order and people standing against other people in council selection and everything to try to sort it out. You've got an issue and you get around the table and you sort it out. And that isn't about being idealistic, actually that's about being pragmatic and practical. And that's something which I think good clubs, good local authorities can do regardless of whatever political persuasion.
Excellent, thanks Tom. Let's take another couple of questions. So I've got one at the back there and then one over at the right there. I'll take those two and then we'll...
I'm Sam, I work for Sharon Hodgson. I'm also an Oxford fan. I wanted to ask, whether you think the government or a regulator should be able to prevent human rights abusers from buying football clubs? That could be countries like Saudi Arabia or individuals like Russian oligarchs. I know that this is the Magnitsky test. That plays a role in it. Just wondered if you had a point of view on that.
Thank you very much. Question over there.
Hi, I'm Amy, I have a question on the women's review. So obviously it's not easy because of the sun, one of the fastest growing sports can see how politics has delayed and disrupted what your homework is. So how do we ensure that the women's review is done in a quick and urgent manner that was sustainable, growth, and provide the infrastructure that we need for that demand to outpace?
Brilliant, thank you. And I've got one more question just over there.
Okay, that's a chair of the Old Body Football Group, also Sheffield Wednesday supporter. Don't all commiserate so much. I was just thinking of Tracy as the Maoist dictator. Probably the only way that Spurs are going to win the Premiership, isn't it? But just a couple of issues. I mean, let's bring politics into it. I mean, I want to see this government deliver on the review and produce a white paper and get on the legislation quickly. I should be challenging the new sports minister on that. We're going to have private conversations with him. I think it's going to be challenging. But if the government don't, this will become an issue in the general election, because Labour is committed to implementing it now very clearly, and will do it. And that would be a pity in a way, not pity that we're committed, but is actually cross-party agreement. You went and asked all MPs for a free vote on this. There'd be a massive vote in favour of doing this, because MPs pick it up from their constituencies. Most MPs represent seats with EFL clubs or National League clubs, and that's where they're based. So it's important. But just the same as you might ask directly probably to Rick, the politics of football itself. The Premier League are probably sat there, not talking and waiting, because they think nothing may happen immediately. Once they think something may happen, are they going to come up perhaps with an offer, which isn't an offer as good as the review was putting forward, but a half solution, and say, well, look what we've done now, we've moved on this, there's no need to do any more. And how does the EFL react to that?
So that means we've got three very good questions there. One on human rights abuses and the degree to which that should affect ownership. A second on the women's review and how we can maintain pace. And then a third there on both the politics of football and the politics of Westminster. Rick, let me start with you on the politics of football question. How do you think these interactions with the Premier League might play out? Do you think that Clive's suggestion is right?
It's a great question, Clive. We've had a dry run during the pandemic when they made an inadequate offer and we were told to accept it. And we didn't have a great deal of choice. We're getting braver, and if they make an inadequate offer, we will say no. This is why, so without intervention, the idea that we are just told to go and negotiate with the Premier League, we think is a little bit naive, because Premier League is whetting appetites and saying it's on the verge of emerging, and they have the new deal for English football, but what does happen when we say, well, it's not adequate? What next? Will it take another 2 years to get a counter offer? So we're sceptical, but we're also brave, and we're not just going to. I think that the days of us just accepting the crumbs from the Premier League's table have gone, because otherwise the game will be lost, and we can't go forward this way. So because it's once in a lifetime, we have to be brave and stand firm, and I think we will.
So let me come to you on the kind of raw politics of this, the other part of Clive's question. If there isn't action on this, or kind of white paper isn't published soon, do you think there is a risk this becomes an issue at the general election, and is that a risk for the government, for the Conservative Party?
Yes, very bluntly. I mean, I've got a red wall seat. I've been behind the family review from the beginning, but this would absolutely destroy me. I mean, I think Andy Holt would be pulling me every 2 minutes, but I throw my whole back behind it. It's not just because of the general election, it's the right thing to do in communities like mine. So I think politically, yes, it's a very dangerous game if we don't move forward with it, and forward very quickly. That is not me talking as the Vice Chair of the Conservative Party, that is me talking as a Red Wall MP who gets it. And there's a lot of us making noises. I do want to turn around and actually say the new Minister, Stuart Andrew, is a very, very good man. He is enlisting board, he gets it, so is Michelle, she's a very good Secretary of State. But so we are all having those conversations. We get the political side of this, we understand it, but we also need to push that it's just the right thing to do. That's it. Tracy.
I mean, it's a no-brainer. I mean, I want it done as soon as possible, but you know, I'm So I said, yeah, I'm relatively relaxed. I know in 5 years' time I'm going to become the regulator. I'd like us as, as a Conservative MP, I would have liked us to bring it in and get the credit and everything else, but it'll come. It's enormously frustrating. I mean, Sarah's right. At the end of the day, this will become a political issue, and it's set aside for now something that we're a bazillion points behind in the opinion polls. The fact is if we've gone into an election and a fairly neutral sort of kind of, it only takes Andy to say the programme that the government has failed to deliver, and 500 people switched their vote as a consequence of that, and that's it. Lost a seat. So of course it is of political importance as well, and I hope that people are listening and recognising that. I mean, I can take some of the other questions.
Yeah, so I was going to ask particularly on the human rights ownership and the women's reviews.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, it's really difficult because we the whole Newcastle takeover happened at the end of the review, but I think it was we published the review a week after, and I was asked a lot by journalists about this very issue, and I didn't know the detail of the Newcastle deal. But I said, all along, it's very difficult to have a different set of rules for football and the business of football that you would have in any other business. And to be clear, PIF own a large chunk of Disney, they own Facebook, they own Uber, they own, Deliveroo and various other things, and people still they own the company that runs Glastonbury, like Nation, whatever it is. So don't see people going out there and boycotting Glastonbury. So I'm just saying that it's very difficult. We can all feel hugely uncomfortable about it, but you can't have necessarily separate rules. And particularly when we as a nation, under all political, under Labour and Conservative governments, have done deals and trade deals and arms deals and everything else with Saudi. So it's a really challenging one. The Women's Review has been launched. Karen's got her remit, she's gone off, she's started meeting and having discussions. I don't know how long that process is going to be, but I'm confident that it's in good hands. And I think actually in some respects it's going to be really challenging. The reason why we put the recommendation to have a separate women's review is there was a lot of different opinion about what should happen to the future of women's football. And I think that as success in the professional side of women's game grows and continues to evolve, that variety of opinion will continue. Should it sit in the Premier League? Should it sit in the FA? What should it separate completely from football clubs? Should Man City they become different to Man City football? So many different questions that it was too difficult for us to deal with in that particular part of fan review. But fans had a view on it, and I hope that actually fans will form an important part of the discussion around the women's review. And then also in terms of the question about politics, to finalise on that, I mean, I still just don't get the whole sort of kind of situation of the Premier League going to come to the EFL with a proposal without actually supporting regulation that would secure Premier League money going to the EFL. I mean, I just find it bizarre. I'm not saying the EFL is badly managed, but there are clubs in there that have real significant challenges and need better governance and better regulation. So while the Premier League is going to come up with a proposal that gives money to part of the pyramid that still has significant financial challenges and ownership challenges and governance challenges, is still beyond me. And so to me, forgive my language, it's a little bit arse about face, and until you get the regulation in place, then that's when you can't start having negotiation around the distribution. And that's why Rick and the EFL sort of kind of accepted that there needs to be regulation, because with that can come a better deal for football from the Premier League. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think you were outvoted by it. We agree, but they go hand in hand.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
go hand in hand. It's not one before the other. The two go hand in hand. But we have never ever said that we don't want better regulation. Have we?
No.
Steve, let me bring you in on this political question. I think so you're looking to jump in.
So a few points on that. In terms of regulation and redistribution, I'm desperate for both, hand in hand. And what I do not want is more money and then to be able to spend it on lower wages. I want to be able to say to my owner, I'm not facing jeopardy every single month to pay the wages, but I have to come to you with my hand open. I want to be able to run this business properly, sensibly and sustainably. If he wants to invest in certain aspects, fantastic, back that up. When you come to the political aspects and picking up on what Rick made about the COVID loan and just to amplify the position of the Championship in all this, I think there's this position, the Championship, well that's okay. You look at the COVID loans, League One and League Two were grants. Championship, I've got a £8 million debt slung around our neck. We don't have that. My owner puts money in, it goes in as equity. Suddenly I've got a debt. I've still got £3 million of debt sitting on my books I've got to pay off out of cash flows that I haven't got. So when we get into this, we need to remember the Championship is the worst place of all. It is not okay. Yes, we have some wealthy owners, but that doesn't mean we should over-rely on them. We need to get them out of that scenario, make sure they can't start blowing their money, but actually mean they can start running their businesses properly. And don't think we're okay, because we're not. And the Championship is the place where there's the biggest ball about to go off.
Parachute payments. That'll bring the Premier League clubs around the table when they realise all this area.
Okay, we'll make sure that gets fed in directly. Tom, let me give you the final word. Kind of, from a sports association perspective, coming up to the 1 year review, what is your message? What is the plea? You've got members of Parliament in the room. You've got people that are clearly interested in this work for MPs. What's the plea from fans to make progress?
Well, the first plea, we had a meeting with Stuart Andrew a couple of weeks ago, and made very clear, you've got the solution in front of you. You know you've got to go through the process for the white paper. Get the white paper out and get on with it. Because if you don't, what people will see, whether it's fair or not, is that actually the powers that be at the Premier League have won, and they've sacrificed the opportunity to put football on a much more sustainable footing for a very short period of time. Because, as Clive said, as we know, the Labour Party are absolutely committed to implementing the family review in full. The government should be, because then it stops it being a party-political issue, and then it's about sustainability of football clubs and communities across the country. Make it a political issue at your peril, is what I would say.
There we are. Well, there is a huge amount more to say on this, and Onward will continue doing work on it. But for now, all is left to say thank you very much to you for coming along. This round of applause to my panel.